Take a moment and picture a British high street in 1973. Look closely at the people walking past shop windows, waiting for buses, carrying groceries home. Something immediately stands out to modern eyes. Almost nobody is overweight. This isn't a trick of camera angles or selective footage. Obesity, as we understand it today, was genuinely rare. And yet this was not a nation obsessed with fitness, protein shakes, or gym memberships. Most people didn't jog, they didn't count calories, they didn't talk about metabolism or body fat percentages. They simply lived differently. The slimness of 1970s, Britain was not the result of discipline or moral superiority. It was the natural outcome of an environment shaped by scarcity, structure, and physical effort. A world that quietly guided people toward balance without them even noticing. To understand why Britons were so slim in the 1970s, we have to begin decades earlier, with a mindset formed in the shadow of war. Although the Second World War ended in 1945, food rationing in Britain continued until 1954. For nearly a decade after peace returned, families still lived with ration books, shortages, and strict limits on meat, sugar, butter, and fats. The generation raising children in the 1970s had been shaped by this experience. Food was not casual, it was not abundant, it was something to be respected. Meals were measured in ounces, leftovers were saved without question. Throwing food away was not just wasteful, it was seen as morally wrong, almost criminal. This rationing psychology lingered long after the official rules disappeared. People cooked only what was needed, plates were cleared, not piled high. The Ministry of Food had trained an entire nation to think scientifically about nutrition. Housewives learned to plan meals mathematically, ensuring the family received enough calories, protein, and vitamins, but no excess. This habit persisted. Food was fuel, not entertainment. At the same time, movement was woven naturally into daily life. In 1970, nearly half of British households did not own a car. Children walked long distances to school, often unsupervised. Adults walked to work, to the shops, to visit friends. Walking was not exercise, it was simply how life functioned. Shopping itself was physically demanding. There were no massive supermarkets where everything could be bought at once. People visited the butcher, the baker, the greengrocer, each in a different part of town. Groceries were carried home in bags that grew heavier with every stop. Saving a few pence by walking instead of taking the bus was common. These small, repeated efforts created a high baseline level of activity that modern sedentary life cannot replicate. Inside the home, the kitchen told a similar story. In 1970, convenience foods made up only a tiny fraction of household food spending. Cooking meant peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, watching pots for hours. Preparing food required physical effort and time. This effort acted as a natural brake on overeating. When making more food meant significantly more work, portion sizes stayed reasonable. You didn't mindlessly snack because snacks didn't exist in convenient form. Food came from ingredients, not packets. Domestic science was a compulsory school subject. While it was far from equal, it ensured that much of the population understood how food was made. People knew what went into meals, nothing was hidden. Sugar, too, was treated very differently. It was relatively expensive and used sparingly. Sweets were occasional treats, often reserved for Saturdays. Children did not graze on sugar throughout the day. Soft drinks were luxuries, brought out for birthday parties or special occasions. Most children drank water, milk, or heavily diluted squash. Liquid calories, one of the biggest drivers of modern weight gain, barely existed. The idea of drinking hundreds of calories without noticing simply wasn't part of daily life. Food itself was not engineered for addiction. Yogurt was plain and tangy. Breakfast cereals were simple grains like porridge or cornflakes, not sugar-coated confections. Flavors were modest. Foods filled you up instead of pushing you to eat more. Even the physical size of plates shaped behavior. A standard dinner plate in the 1970s measured about 9 inches across. Today's plates are often 12 inches wide. That difference quietly resets expectations of what a normal portion looks like. Meat was not the centerpiece of every meal. It was often a side note, accompanied by large servings of vegetables and potatoes. A single roast chicken was expected to feed a family twice, once as a roast and again as leftovers turned into pie or soup. Food had a beginning, a middle, and an end. People ate 3 meals a day, and that structure was socially enforced. Snacking between meals was discouraged. It was said to spoil your appetite. Offices didn't have vending machines on every floor. Eating at your desk was considered unprofessional. Shops closed early, often around 5 in the evening, cutting off late-night impulse buying entirely. Work itself burned calories. Millions of Britons were employed in physically demanding industries: coal mining, steelworks, shipbuilding, manufacturing. 8 hours of daily exertion was normal. Even office work involved movement, stairs, walking, and manual tasks. At home, domestic chores were far more labor-intensive. Vacuum cleaners were heavy. Washing machines required supervision. Floors were scrubbed by hand. Gardening, DIY, and home maintenance were routine parts of life. Leisure time was active too. With only 3 television channels and limited broadcasting hours, people didn't sit endlessly in front of screens. They went outside, they gardened, children played outdoors until dark. Movement was built into boredom. Social pressure reinforced these patterns. Doctors, family members, and even employers were blunt about weight gain. This wasn't kind, but it created accountability. Clothes were less forgiving. Plus-size options were limited. If you gained weight, your clothes simply stopped fitting, and replacing them was expensive. Food itself consumed a much larger portion of household income, often 25 to 30%. Families couldn't afford to overeat. Waste was unthinkable. Economic instability in the 1970s, strikes, power cuts, the 3-day work week, reinforced conservative habits. Excess felt risky, almost irresponsible. By the time the decade ended, Britain had experienced one of the lowest obesity rates in its modern history. Not because people tried harder, but because the system made it easy to stay balanced. The story of slim 1970s Britain is not about willpower. It's about environment. When food is scarce but nourishing, movement unavoidable, portions modest, and social norms structured, the human body regulates itself naturally. The modern obesity crisis is not a failure of individuals. It is the predictable result of a world that has removed effort, structure, and limits, and replaced them with abundance, convenience, and constant temptation. In the 1970s, people didn't fight their environment. They lived within it, and their bodies quietly followed.